Okay, so before I begin, I just want to say that I've actually had a small bias against the 65 watt EliteDesk units. I guess because it always felt like, well, is there really much difference between the 35 and the 65? Why do I have to use this 90 watt power supply when I can just use 65 for everything? The motherboards look the same. Yeah, maybe there's some differences in the heat sinks, and you got an extra fan, but then you have to worry about the extra fan, otherwise it won't run. So I've really been focusing a lot on the 35 watt. I do own a 65 watt G2 and a G3, although the G3 I haven't put a non-T processor in it yet. When it came to the G4 though, the 35 and the 65 watt, and also there is a 95 watt, do have differences in the motherboards. And so to sort of complete my collection, I really needed to get a G4 65 watt, and I wanted to put in a non-T processor in it. So this is kind of a review, show and tell, comparison. We'll compare the 35 watt to the 65 watt as far as the motherboards. We'll do some benchmarks on this one. This particular unit, I wanted to keep the price down low because when I got this one, I got it, pretty much had all the stuff. It wasn't even supposed to have the extra fan for the caddy, but it ended up coming with it. The only thing really it was missing was memory, a drive, and CPU. I know that's a lot of things missing, but some are so bare bone you don't even get fans and heat sinks. So, but I wanted to keep the price down, so I ended up going with an i3 8100. It's only 4 core, but at least it would be a non-T processor, so I could at least have something for comparison. So as you'll notice right away, it's got the vented hood, which the 65 watt has in order, for the better cooling. Front looks, pretty much the same as you would see even on the 35 watt. Back, this particular unit, two display ports for USB. This one has a Flex IO with another display port. Power. This one is going to use a 90 watt power supply. And if you don't get a 90 watt power supply, you're going to get beeps. This one also is a 19.5 volt, 4.62 amp, if you can see it there. And make sure to get the right power specs if you do buy. They have lots of different 90 watts. I've ordered and gotten ones that were 19 volt. The amperage was different and so forth, but this is the standard as far as for this particular unit. Let's see, the bottom, very standard. It's got the same kind of thing where it will tell you that that it is 65 watt. This one doesn't have, some of the other ones will have the little codes that will tell you what originally came in it, serial number, power and such. You'll probably notice here that it says it's a Core i5 vPro. Well, of course, that's not what's actually in here. This isn't even the top case that came with what I ordered. That one had a little bit of a dent, and so I replaced it. I had bought a cover thinking that I would want to have a little more ventilation for one of my G4s, and I just never used it, so I just threw it on here because I thought it looked a lot better. Same normal thumb screw. Let's open it up. Okay. Right away we see the copper heatsink. It's got the fan here. Let's take out the SATA. You've got your hard drive fan. This has to be connected and operating, otherwise you're going to get an error in the BIOS when you try to boot up. This one, when I first brought it up, it gave that error, and I think what it was when I was doing some work on it, I inadvertently pulled this out and didn't quite seat it all the way back in. Once I got it nice and seated in, everything was fine. I'm going to take this out and show you, well, what's underneath. Of course, your memory. Spec-wise, it's supposed to max out at 32 gig. A lot of folks have 64 in these. This is supposed to take up to the 2666 megahertz DDR4. This particular, because I'm using the i3, I can only get 2400 megahertz speed on it. You can put up to an i7 8700K, but that's on the 95 watt unit, which takes 150 watt power supply. For this particular unit, I believe the best you could probably get is an i7 8700. The K, of course, is for the overclocking. You probably wouldn't, if you're going to go that route, you're going to need the true 95 watt. If I ever get my hands on one of those, we'll do a video on that. They're very hard to find, very rare. They have a whole different kind of heat sink that takes up, most of the space. Again, the motherboard is different because it's got the right connectors and so forth so that you can put in that giant heat sink. Let's take this out. Okay, we got our T15 bit. And always good to take that off first, otherwise, like I've always done numerous times, is you pull everything out and you take the SATA cable right off the motherboard. Thankfully, it's fairly forgiving, and all the times that I've had it come out, I was able to put it back in. Now, you will want to be careful taking out this caddy so that you don't pull the cable off there. So I'm just going to kind of put it to the side here. So normally we would have a Wi-Fi card here. This particular unit did come with the antennas. I don't know if you could see it there, but they're kind of hidden. They just were not ever really hooked up. They're still in their nice little plastic covering. So you'd have your Wi-Fi card here. You could put your 2280 SSD right there, M.2, or if you can get one of these funky screws, you can put a 2230. You can put another 2280 over here, and again, another 2230. You're going to run into the same constraints as far as you won't be able to put in two SSDs unless you could put a 2280 here and your SATA, and that's no problem. Or you could put a 2280 SATA and then try to fit in a 2230. It's going to go down at a real tight angle, but you'll be able to fit it in. Now, some of the differences, let's see if we can move and get our 35 watt power supply, it's not power supply, motherboard to compare with. Okay, now we got them side by side. Trying to get this in the middle here. Okay. Over here we've got this connector. Does not exist over here. You can actually even see where it would go, and it just it's got, I don't know what you'd call those, but just the little foundation for them there. So that's not there. And then also over here, This is what you would connect that one USB-C that's got the power delivery goes into there for the 35 watt. If we look over here, again, it looks like it's just sort of the foundation. It looks like the sizing of where everything goes as far as the screws would be the same. So possibly you could use, you could swap motherboards, you're just not going to have the functionality. So this particular connector, that's for the GPU that you can buy, separately and add in. And that, again, is only available for the 35 watt. But then, of course, you need a 150 watt power supply in order to run it. If you have your Flex IO here, it will take, this is a pretty standard size here. This will even work in a G3, or you can get some of the larger ones, more of kind of the square. Now this particular one is for the 35 watt because it's got this extra cable. I've always been curious, and we're going to give it a try, is to see if I take this cable out, or I guess I could just leave it hanging, but I'll probably just take it out to see if it will still work as a USB-C Flex IO. Because there's the other kind of Flex IO, which I show in a video about the G3 and USB-C that looks like this, that you can go in, and I know that works. But I was curious to see if this one would work because, you might find this one cheaper. And you're like, well, I don't need the power delivery. As long as the unit still works, I can do without the power delivery, and it fits. So we'll give that a try also. While we've got this guy open, I'm going to go ahead and put in that Flex IO. Because it's such a pain, because normally you get there, you got to take everything out anyway. So first I'm going to just take this off. You got to remember, this one goes at the outside, this one goes in. Okay. All right, we need a Phillips for that. And these Flex IOs, if it's one that hasn't come out before, it can be pretty tight here. Sometimes I'll put my nail under. All right, let's use a smudger here. Try to get underneath. There we go. Just takes a little bit to sort of break the seal. Looks like it's a little on right here. There we go. Okay. Make sure to save this because you'll probably want to use it somewhere else or maybe put it back into this unit later. Okay, now I'll take this one. These larger ones, you have to sort of tilt it. Tilt it in so it gets nice and flush. I think I'm a little off. Yeah, there we go. Okay. And we also kind of heard that snap. That means it engaged with the connector underneath. Okay, let's go ahead and put back the caddy, making sure not to disconnect it. The fan. And get all the... I like to make sure that this fan cable is out of the way because sometimes that gets jammed in there too. Ah, there we go. Oh, almost had it. There we go. Okay. There's like a little lip on this one. They just have to get it right underneath there. Okay. And where's our... Okay. Okay. I'm going to put this back on and we'll power up. Oh, you know what I forgot to do? Got to put the screws in. Flex IO. I look down and I see them sitting there. Got all excited putting that caddy back in. Move that out of the way. Okay, now we'll stick this on, bring up some power, and I'm kind of curious. We're going to check some stuff in the BIOS when we boot up first. Okay, here we are in the BIOS, and I'm curious to see on the other USB-C units, particularly on the G3, there was a setting you had to do under Advanced and then Port Options so that it wouldn't keep updating the USB Type-C, the rear one that we just installed. Now what's interesting is that it looks like it already detected it because it's saying something about rear USB Type-C downstream charging. So maybe that's a good sign. Okay, while we're here, I want to check a couple things, do a couple settings just to make sure that system options. Okay, yeah, we've got the whole multiprocessor virtual stuff going on. Let's check our BIOS. I know some folks were wondering, how to update the BIOS. Well, here it is. You have to make sure that you've got your network, cable connected and that it's, all set and ready to go to the outside world. But if we click on Update System BIOS, looks like here it was never been checked. So all the way back to 2019. So this is old one here. Let's go ahead and check HP. It's going to configure our network. All right. Wow. Okay. So our current BIOS is 2.06 and the one to update is 2.29. I think I'm going to go ahead and update. So we'll let this run. Now, I made kind of an error on here is that I plugged my 90 watt power supply into my UPS, but I didn't plug it into one of the battery backed up ones. So let's hope that in the middle of doing this update, we don't get some strange, power failure and brick the unit. So what I would always recommend is that if you're going to be doing any kind of BIOS updating, if you can be plugged in to battery backup to help ensure that everything's fine. Even when I haven't been plugged in, I've never had it happen, but of course, whenever you say never, then that's when it happens. So we'll let this run and do the update, and then we should be able to go into Windows and maybe we'll check out that USB-C connector. Looks like it decided to also update the Intel Management Engine firmware. I believe that's the stuff that's used with the vPro remote connection type stuff. So that's kind of nice. Takes care of it at the same time. Now it looks like it's updating the front USB-C firmware. I just missed it, but it also updated the back USB-C firmware. And it did go black for, I would say, almost a good minute. So if it goes black and it looks like it's just sitting there and, I don't know, hung up, give it time. Don't turn off anything until you either get booted into Windows or back in the firmware or something so that you don't mess anything up.
And here we got the final step. I guess there's quite a bit. So I know I've done these in other videos, but it's always good just to kind of see what happens. And I would always recommend that whenever you get one of these units, a lot of times they're coming from who knows where corporation, and then maybe they just never wanted to mess with updating the BIOS. But you might as well fix any problems that may have encountered. And we are in Windows, so that's nice. We're all booted up. Let's hook up a USB external drive to this just to see if that back USB-C is actually working. I'm gonna. All right, I just plugged it in. We got a local disk. Yep. So we've got. Yep. Looks good. Looks good. I did do some benchmarks when I was doing it on the G3. Let's just curiosity see. This is a NVMe M.2 drive inside of one of these external kind of Sobrent little metal cases. Let's see what we get for benchmarks. Wow, that's quite an improvement over the G3 speeds, because these are about 2.5 times better, or as far as speed, than what I was seeing with the other. I don't know. I'm pretty sure I used the same drive inside and everything else. So interesting. Yeah, the others were like in the 450 range, something like that. So that's good. Well, at least I'm just happy that we have now the option of using that one that is designated for the 35 watt, that we can use it in the 65. We just get rid of that cable and we're ready to go. And I've seen a couple times where it was actually cheaper than the other unit. So that might be something to pick up. I'll include some links for that other one, or the one that I used in this one, so that for those folks that are interested. Let's try doing some stuff with the thermals. What's kind of embarrassing is, as I was running this, I realized that when we were doing the whole comparison, I stuck back on my 65 watt the 35 watt cover, the non-vented one. So before we start doing more stuff with loads and so forth, I'm going to turn the unit off, let stuff cool down a little bit, put the right cover back on, and then we'll come back and we'll try some heavy load, kind of see what it looks like. At the same time, I'll try to hook up so that we can get some power measurements too. Wow, I'm just sitting here and looking, trying to get it kind of idle. I love the temps, nice, high 30s there. The power draw is only like maybe 6 or 7 watts. I mean, I'm just really surprised. Yeah, just had to look at it again. So let's try heavy load for 5 minutes, and let's see what happens with the temps and also the max power draw. Okay, we just started it. Shot up to 50 pretty quickly. And the load shot up to about 50 watts. So let's see what it looks like at the end of 5 minutes. Okay, we've passed the 5-minute mark. Looks like we had a high of around 70 Celsius. And then power draw high was around 53 watts. So I'm going to stop the heavy load and let's see what happens with, I always like to know how quickly it sort of recovers. I checked, and as far as power, it dropped down to, the 6-7 watt pretty quickly. I guess maybe we did at some point must have hit 75 Celsius, maybe because of the fact that we're on heavy load and it's taken over the CPU. It didn't update in the HW info. But considering that's kind of in range as far as temps. But we've only been doing the slowdown or the non-heavy load for maybe a minute and a half here, and we're already down to 50 Celsius. That's a nice recovery, and especially on the power. Now, do remember that this is an i3 8100. A lot of folks out there, when they're getting these 65 watts, they're probably getting kind of the base, or kind of the standard one, which is the i5 8500. And that could very easily have, different power draw, etc. That is a 6-core CPU, where this is a 4-core. The reason I went with this, I think I mentioned earlier, was price. I was able to get the i3 8100 for about half the cost. I think the i5, when I originally got one for the other one, it was closer to around 50. Now I'm seeing them down in maybe the $36 range, and I got the i3 for about $18. So if you don't need a real hardcore one, might save you some bucks. I'm going to bring up Geekbench and show you the comparisons, and you'd be surprised how well this particular CPU has performed. So here we can see, I've sorted it by the multi-core numbers. So here's our guy right here, which is the G4 65 watt i3 8100. It had a 3846 and then a 1287 for the single, which actually for all the numbers is the best one. But so you can see here, so here's an 8500T, which is 6-core. Yes, the multi-core is obviously a little better, more cores there, etc. But the single is not as great. This one is another G4 that I have, which is running it on the Linux version, 8600T, and that's even a little better. And then finally, we've got a G5 for comparison. That's also a T processor, a 35 watt, and then you can see the numbers. But considering that I spent less for this GPU, it's kind of nice that you get pretty decent numbers for the particular setup. Here's the 7500. You can again kind of see on a G3 on the other end. So I have to say, based on the low amount of power draw at idle, some of these nice thermals, just the overall performance, I feel kind of bad for my bias against the 65 watt. I'm not always so wild about having use the 90 watt power supply, but thing is, technically you could use it with the lower end. I just kind of a stickler. I just like everything to sort of match up. And then, of course, I have to buy, 2 sets of power adapters. But I've got so many of the 35 watt and so many power supplies that I wouldn't worry about that anyway. And if as I've mentioned before, there's a flood of HP power supplies out there, so they're not going to run out of them. So I would definitely, have it as a recommendation. And perhaps, if you're trying to keep costs low, maybe go something, relatively bare bone, and then get the CPU separately. But do make sure that you've got both sets of fans and they're working and they're not loud and et cetera, et cetera. Mine has been, pretty whisper quiet. If you can hear anything, that's actually my G3 going crazy, having to do this video capture, and so. Yeah, so again, another good thumbs up recommendation.